morning or good afternoon, juniors, whenever you are hearing this. I'm recording this on Thursday night, anticipating that I may not be able to come in on Friday for some good news. My daughter is in labor, and I must drive Mrs. Bueno down to Lancaster to the hospital, so it's very likely that we are there throughout the night. But God willing, little Savannah Rose will be born healthy, and Mom will be doing well. And you'll have this to at least prepare you for the rest of the natural law theory that I'm going to work with you on Tuesday. So anyway, let's go ahead and just get started here. The goal is really just 2 slides here. So I want to talk about what exactly natural law is, how it is the law of the heart, and then I'm going to compare it to different types of law. So I'll have a video, just like a minute and 40 seconds of now Bishop Barron, although it says Father Barron in the video, and he'll just kind of give a real quick intro into natural law. No need to take notes. I'm going to be able to give you what you need from the slide materials. So we are going to call natural law the law written on the heart. I'll explain a little bit about that today and the rest on Tuesday. Here's Bishop Barron.
Natural law, I'll go back to Thomas Aquinas, it's in the first part and the second part of the second. Eternal law is the mind of God. So it's God's own mind by which the world is made and by which the world is structured. The natural law is a participation in eternal law, or a reflection of it. And I can see it in the structures of the world. I can also sense it within my own moral self. Call it a deep sense of the basic goods, a deep intuition regarding the structuring elements of the moral life. That's the natural law. Now, what participates in the natural law is human law, Thomas calls it. We might call it positive law today. That means the laws that govern our society, from a traffic light to tax legislation to a declaration of war. These are all instantiations of the moral law, which is itself an instantiation of eternal law. So I would situate it midway between God's own mind and the particular applications that we call positive law. The mediating reality are these fundamental intuitions regarding the basic goods. That's the natural law. So that's why we can mount, for example, in the public forum, an argument of morality, which is not sectarian, but is meant to appeal to anyone's common moral sensibility.
Okay, so let's start out by saying exactly what natural law is. Will be a definition for natural law. So natural law is the participation of the eternal law, and I will explain what eternal law is in a little bit, but it's participation of the eternal law in the rational creature. So this is something that we humans does make us exclusive from all other animals and all other creation. And as you'll see, too, it's a way that, God can interact with us in quite, I would almost say, a majestic way. Remember that we're made in His image, so all these little modules that we're working on are connected. And by the way, this is the 3rd module, so if you do need a title for it, you can call it Moral Acts and Law. This will be the first part of the 3rd module. There's just 2 parts to this. So natural law is participation of the eternal law in the rational creature. Now, you need to know that natural law is not a habit, okay? So it's not something that we have just done over time and have acquired. And it is not simply the law found in the natural world. So sometimes people get confused when they hear natural law. They think of the law that you find out in nature. Now, the reason why it's very important to make that distinction, that it is not the law found in the natural world. Let's say for marriage, as an example, we aspire to monogamy as humans, and certainly in the Christian tradition, obviously, but some people will appeal and say that that is not typical among animals. As a matter of fact, there's very few, and hardly any, compared to the vast number of species there are, where animals do practice a monogamy. So it's very rare, so therefore, why should it be something that we do. If it's not in nature, then why is it something that we have to ascribe to? So we're not trying to say what we find in nature is the law that we find in us. We're saying it's not out in nature, but it's a law that's in our nature. So it's natural in that all mankind is subject to it from birth. So it's natural to the human person. It's not something that we see and mirrored out in nature and then we try to follow. So just make sure you understand that distinction. Now, what is nice about this is that natural law is something that can be known by the unaided use of human reason. So what that means is through reason alone, one can not just acquire, but hold to and live by natural law. So when I say unaided, I mean that is not necessary that we have supernatural grace. So this is intelligible to every person. So we have this ability to know by reason. And again, this is what elevates us from all other animals. If you remember in the Imago Dei, we are not subject to instincts, right? Now, it's said often that natural law is the law that cannot not be known. That's a purposeful double negative. So there is nothing in natural law that cannot not be known. Now, I am going to talk to you on Tuesday about various levels or degrees, if you want, about natural law. But the basic precepts are certainly something that cannot not be known. They're also not unique in revelation. So this is what we would call natural revelation, but there's also what we have in the Ten Commandments, what we call supernatural revelation. So the connection between what has been revealed in the Ten Commandments and what has been revealed within our nature is in relation to the Ten Commandments is that, let's see how I can say this to you. I'm going to pause this. Okay, brain freezes over. Both of these teach us the true humanity of man. So if natural law is something we can do by the unaided use of grace, we know by reason alone, it still was relevant for it to be revealed in through the Ten Commandments. So the relation to the Ten Commandments, the relation of natural law that is they both teach us the true humanity of man. So they bring to light, essential duties we have, our fundamental rights. They're all based in natural law. The Decalogue, what we call the Ten Commandments, is almost what we would say a privileged expression of natural law. Saint Irenaeus sort of said it the best. He said God was just content to remind the human people of the natural law. So this is one of those things that if you want an analogy, perhaps your mom or dad would send you to the market and tell you to pick up some bread, some milk, some cereal. And although you were told, right, so you heard it, he or she's also going to write it down. And you might say, well, you already told me. I don't want you to forget. Well, this is sort of the same thing. God's revelation is not exclusive, where one thing is delivered naturally, one thing is delivered written down, one thing is delivered, let's say through direction of the church. We'd say supernatural grace. This is, in a sense, redundant, but it's redundant because it's that important. So anyway, Saint Irenaeus again basically said that God was content to remind us of the natural law through the Ten Commandments. So what this implies then, and this is really, the question that's going to help us answer maybe some of the things you're thinking about for people who are not born Christian, they're not born in a country where they have access to revelation, or they never heard of Christ. What then does that mean for the person standing before God? Well, the understanding of natural law implies that man is without excuse. That is the phrase to remember. Man is without excuse. So whether you're Christian, Jew, some other belief system, if you deny Christ outright or practically, like being an atheist and agnostic, and again, even if you've never had the opportunity to have the gospel presented to you, it's written in the heart. So this is the law of the heart. And this obviously does not excuse those of us who have been baptized Christians or raised in a culture saturated with the message of Christ. So we're not going to say, well, do I really have to follow any church teachings or believe? Okay, so I was baptized Christian, but you're saying there's a law written on my heart, so as long as I follow that, I'm okay. No, this would be for people, and the word we would use, and maybe you should know this, it's known as invincible ignorance. In other words, it's ignorance that they had no ability, nor did they have the opportunity to overcome. So if you want to put it into perspective, it'd be somebody who was raised in a culture where they never had access to what we call the gospel. They were never evangelized. That would not be true for people that are in Burke's Catholic. So we can't, dismiss all revealed religion and say, well, if we follow the law in our hearts, is it okay? You're going to have to recall, too, that this is going to be quite objective. This is not something subjective where it can differ from one person to the other. This is quite objective. And I'll be able to really, answer more questions on that and speak directly to that point on Tuesday. All right, so let's do the last slide, and this will be the types of law. And really, I'm just doing this to put it into perspective. Now, I'm going to give you first a definition for law, and you already know how I'll probably quiz you on this. I'll put this into a multiple response, and you'll have to fill in a few of the words. All right, now it's a little lengthy, only a long sentence, but again, each and every component of it is essential. So, law is defined as a command of reason, and it is for the common good. So, a command of reason for the common good by someone who has care of the community. For the common good by someone who has care of the community. And it must be made known. A law is a command of reason for the common good by someone who has care of the community, and it must be made known. There are 4 important aspects or components of that definition. And one of those is it's a command of reason. So this has to be reasonable. That may sound obvious, but all of natural law and what we would say also what appears in the 10 Commandments are reasonable. I can answer questions on that later. It's for the common good. So it's not for any particular individual, any particular race, people in power. It is for the common good of all. And that's a term we would break down more if we start teaching about social justice. And also, the third component is someone in authority. So it can't simply be me. Like, I may be able to make certain rules that would be enforceable for my room, 204, but I could not make a rule that's enforceable through the school. I have no authority. That is with Mr. Ballister and the people that guide him. So too in a country, you can see that we could not accept vigilantism. The rules have to come from those in authority, properly elected officials, and not from some other entity. Okay, and the last part of that definition is it must be made known. Now, oftentimes that's used, the word used is promulgated. It must be promulgated. So it means that this cannot be some hidden law, okay? Whatever this law is, as long as it's in accord with reason and it's for all people, and the person who is prescribing it obviously has authority, it must be made known. Now, that doesn't mean that, every single person in the United States would have to know every single aspect of your law, but it has to be reasonably accessible to an individual. So those 4 components are very important, all right? And how this works then is that we can almost understand God ruling the universe, with his wisdom. So before I start talking about eternal law, if you wonder what is God's connection to all of us here, if he seems distant, if it seems like he's a watchmaker that has, put everything into motion and now he's watching and going, if this is a participation in his eternal law, and you'll see shortly what that is, this is how God rules the universe with his wisdom and directs it towards its divine fulfillment. So not only does he sustain us in his love, which you had that before, remember, communio personarum, we're made in love and for love, but also through natural law, he guides us with his wisdom towards fulfillment. All right, so eternal law. This is the law in God's own mind. You may have heard the word logos. So eternal law is the law in God's own mind. Now, what this is divine wisdom, and it directs all actions and movements to their proper end. All right? Divine wisdom directs all actions and movements to their proper end. So you already now at least should remember the word teleological, this goal-oriented, and I spoke about that in morality. So you can see now how it's God's law within himself, although he is the law, it's not something, separate from him. It's him directing all actions and movements to their proper end. So whatever we are, he's calling us as human beings to fulfillment, whatever it might be that the perfection of a tree is, or a mountain, or a waterfall. He calls all these things to his fulfillment and sustains them in his love. So that's eternal law. This is the law in God's own mind. Now, divine law, this is the law as it appears to us humans. All right, this is the law that appears to us as humans. And before I talk about the Old and New Testament, it's especially through revelation. So this is the law as it appears to humans through revelation. So we have it written down. So the Old and the New Testaments, or the Old and the New Covenant, however you want to hear it, this encompasses the divine law. All right, so you can see this is not something separate from eternal law. This is just another bit of how it is revealed and activated in our lives. So divine law, that is the law as it appears to humans, and especially in Revelation. All right, so now we can repeat what Bishop Barron had said, and let's define natural law as man's participation in eternal law. So you remember the two mythos, right? The priestly mythos, which is from Genesis, is very orderly, and God made man in his image, and we are made to be not slaves, like in the Enuma Elish, and not an afterthought, but we're made to image God. So this is how we image God. We participate in his eternal law, that which is necessary for us to be guided by his wisdom. Now, the Imago Dei, which I already spoke to you about, right? So we're made in his image, we are rational, we are free, we're not determined, we also are contingent on him, supernaturally oriented, and so on. These are all ways that we image God, but this is all really just part of our participation in the eternal law, which is the law in God's own mind. All right? If any of that's confusing, again, I'll pick it up next week. Then what we have is human law, or what you heard Bishop Barron say, it's often referred to as positive law. So these are the laws, like say we would have in the United States. And that is drawn from natural law and reason. So they take the laws that are written in our hearts, the things that of morality that seem obvious to us, or at least things that we would not contest. And once I break down the precepts of natural law, this will be clear. So for now, just keep in mind that human law, the law, positive law that we have in our country, draws from both natural law and reason, right? So it includes the positive civil law. Now, these are approved by custom, and we would say they come from nature, but they are approved by custom. So human law, as we know, is not perfect. It often gets improved as we go. So as we improve this law as we go, that means approved by custom. It seems to have worked in one way or another, although it needs to be tweaked. So this is obviously not perfect, right? This is something that we learn from, but it's also from natural law that this has derived. You'll find that in the Declaration of Independence, in our Constitution. You'll find it most things, most understandings of law up until quite recently, and we'll have to have a discussion about that when I'm there with you. All right. So those are at least the four types of law that I'm going to give you. There's others we can break down. But eternal law, the law in God's own mind; divine law, the law as it appears to humans; especially through revelation. Natural law, that is us, our man's participation in eternal law. And then human law, or positive law, is drawn from both natural law and reason, and that is approved by custom. Okay, the last bit here is pretty simple and straightforward. Human laws, because I told you they're approved by custom, and oftentimes they're imperfect, they can be unjust in two ways. Now, I'm just going to lay them out for you now, and then we're going to look at these in pretty good detail with historical examples on Tuesday, and I think you'll like this part. So anyway, human laws can be unjust in two ways. The first way is the law benefits the ruler rather than the common good. The law benefits the ruler rather than the common good. So you remember I said law is a command or reason for the common good. Well, if you could picture a ruler, now we don't have a system in the United States that would necessarily allow this, although we could probably make an argument that there's an oligarchy at work and the powerful, make laws to fit them, but we don't have a single person that this would speak to. But you could imagine that if a ruler made a law and it simply benefited him and it was not for the common good, that is an unjust law, all right? And I'll say something more about that in a second. But let me give you the second way that a law can be unjust. It can be contrary to the divine law. So this is the law as it appears to humans from the Old and New Testament. So a human law can be unjust in two ways. It could be unjust, firstly, when it benefits the ruler rather than the common good. And secondly, when it is contrary to divine law. Now, just two things about these. When should we or should we not follow the law? And how do we at least determine that? To put it into a sentence. I mean, we can't be specific here. This is very general and just principle-based. If the first way I told you, the law benefits the ruler rather than the common good, we should still follow it. But the reason why is we should follow it if more evil will come from not obeying that law. All right? So let me say it again and then I'll give you an example. We should follow that first law if it benefits the ruler rather than the common good, if by us not following it, more evil will come from it. Maybe you could imagine, and it's just a real fictitious thing here, that the person who's president has millions of dollars invested in an oil refinery, and he makes a law that it helps and aids him. But if there was something that if by us not following it, greater harm would come either to the economy or the other people that this employs. That's not the best example. I'll do better when I'm in front of you and I have other things I can talk about. But nonetheless, just make sure you at least know you must follow it if more evil will come from it than if you do not follow it. But the second way, contrary to divine law, that law should always be resisted and never obeyed. So that would be laws that had inherent racism in them, or if we had laws that allowed murder, like we would say with abortion. I mean, no, abortion is not a law that forces me to have one, right? But if there were a law like we had in the healthcare situation, where various Catholic charities and organizations were resisting it, where they were saying that they must, underneath the Affordable Care Act, provide abortifacients, or at least the medicines for abortion, and they resisted, saying we will not do that. Even under the threat of losing their funding, they refused to do so. So the first way, again, if it benefits the ruler rather than the common good, we should still follow it, because we may cause more, if we would cause more evil by not following it. But if it's contrary to divine law, this thing goes against the basic understanding of the commandments, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, then under no circumstances should we obey it, and we should always resist it. All right, guys, God bless. I hope everything goes well. Keep the Bueno family in your prayers, and I'll see you guys soon.